Hey, nice to have you back, Mike. And we did an interview about a month ago, something like that, for your Hilaritas podcast channel. And I just thought we had quite a few similar interests and that kind of thing. And it would be nice just to do a second interview where it's a little bit more me interviewing you rather than the other way around. But we will, we'll go back and forth as it flows or whatever.
Yeah,
Welcome.
thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I enjoyed chatting with you, so I'm looking forward to doing it again.
Cool. Maybe you could just start by telling the people watching who you are, what you're kind of specialize in, and what motivates you, turns you on, that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah, I feel like I've led like two or three separate lives. So I grew up and I specialized in math and science, or just had a talent for it, I guess you could say. And I went into engineering, got a degree in engineering, and spent a dozen years in that field. And at the same time, I've always had kind of a fascination with psychology. And in fact, I applied to Caltech, and I think I wrote more about psychology than I did engineering. And eventually, I had kind of a life changing experience when my mom passed away. And I decided to move from engineering into psychotherapy. I went to a strange little Buddhist inspired university here in Colorado called Naropa University, where I studied Gestalt, got certified in Gestalt therapy, and I worked as a psychotherapist for probably 10 years. And I got interested in working with the students from my engineering school, and I really enjoyed that. And I felt like I had sort of left my engineering life behind. So I started working on coaching engineers into entrepreneurship, kind of mental health and resilience and strategy, things like that. So that's kind of my main job, I guess you would say, is
Hmm.
coaching engineers and working with my local engineering school that I'm still very close with. And part of that, so that's been combining like the engineering and psychotherapy world, but also kind of what I've kept in the background is this strange interest in psychedelic philosophy. And for reasons I can't really even understand, I've always known about and been interested in Timothy Leary since high school. And that led to Robert Anton Wilson and the Eight Circuit model. And I just became like a really big fan. I had kind of a website, I still have a website that I haven't really maintained in over a decade on Robert Anton Wilson. And then I got involved with his press publisher, and I've been doing a podcast for the publisher, Hilaritas, for coming up on 3 years now, on a monthly podcast that I've been the host on. And I helped produce a book. They found kind of a long lost document that he wrote, or a manuscript, or I guess a short essay or a long essay, short book on Aleister Crowley. So we put together a book of essays by Bob Wilson on Aleister Crowley. I think that was last year.
Hmm.
And so I'm just kind of getting more and more involved with that publisher, and producing books and doing the podcast and doing my coaching. And I guess that's the short rundown or the long
Hmm.
rundown.
Hmm. Well, so yeah, I mean, it sounds like you've maybe a bit like myself managed to carve out a life for yourself that you're kind of turned on to and basically happy with, I guess.
Yeah. I've I've long struggled, I guess, in my own mind, combining these three worlds, and felt like I finally got the engineering and the psychotherapy combined. And now I'm trying to roll the more of the psychonaut psychedelic stuff in. And it's not all psychedelics. I think it's more like spirituality and higher consciousness in a way, and still trying to dovetail that into one integrated whole. We'll
Hmm.
get,
Hmm.
but yeah, kind of this entrepreneurial, I guess, lifestyle you could say, of eclectic things.
So do you I mean, you said you weren't really sure how you got so entangled in the kind of Timothy Leary, Robert Anton Wilson world. But if you had to take a stab at it, what would you say kind of hooked you in, or was there some kind of formative experience at some point in your earlier life, or
I remember in high school we were watching Cheech and Chong's Nice Dreams, and Timothy Leary makes a cameo in that movie.
hmm
And my
hmm
friend that I was watching it with like pointed it out to me, like that's Timothy Leary. Like he knew I was into Timothy Leary, and he pointed it out. I'm just like, I remember that, but I have no idea how I got to that point. Um, and I was into the Grateful Dead and psychedelics in college. And eventually I discovered this website, deoxy.org, which is since gone defunct, but is available like archived on the internet. But anyway, they had Timothy Leary and Robert Anton Wilson featured on the same page. And for Robert Anton Wilson, it said like born, it had like the born on date and or year and the death date. He hadn't died yet, but it had like 1932 dash never. And then it went on to Bob Wilson's. If you clicked on never, it went into his thing on immortality. And
hmm
that really blew my mind. Like I just couldn't wrap my head around it. Immortality, that's just too weird for me. But I kept looking, and really what it was is there was a lot of stuff about that eight circuit model that caught my attention, and I just have been fascinated with that model ever since. And Bob was just a genius at expanding people's minds, expanding possibilities, maybe you would say. And so every time I read him, it just opened me up more and more, and I just got into it. And yeah, I guess that's what comes up for me when you ask me that
hmm
question.
hmm I mean, I have a say, yeah, I never really got into Robert Anton Wilson and read him and stuff like that. I had more like little forays into that kind of general area, Philip K. Dick or whatever. But I had a sense that his book Cosmic Trigger, was it, or something like that, that really sort of inspired a lot of people,
Yeah.
and shifted them, just reading the book kind of somehow shifted them out of a rather sort of stuck vision of their own life or the future and that kind of thing. Is that how you kind of see it, or do you want to speak a bit more about that aspect of it, or if there's some more relevant aspect of it that Robert Anton Wilson got up to?
It wasn't cosmic trigger per se for me, but it was just that same idea that he really had a way with language that that shook you up and got you out of any preconceived notions. It kind of took you out of the box, took me out of my
hmm
box, and it continued
hmm
to add more and more boxes and expand the box. He talks about reality tunnels, and I think it was said, Wilson had his own reality labyrinth, so to speak. And I
hmm
felt like he just continued to open my mind. And so it wasn't like a single aha moment so much as I just felt like he really cracked me open and exposed me to my own preconceived notions and allowed me to move beyond that. And I just really went whole hog on that for several years, reading as much as I can and just getting that, whoa, okay,
hmm hmm hmm
yeah,
Well, there is a certain, I mean, it is with writing sometimes. I think you can just really, I don't know, just someone else's ideas, just literally just take the blinkers off or just open that box up a little bit more, I get that reading people quite regularly, it's like that is an amazing feature of like just a piece of literature, when I kind of reminds me of all the really sort of heavy sort of therapeutic stuff that I did for quite a long time, just to shift me out of my sort of extreme stuckness at the end of end of the 90s, basically. But like, and then even now being able to just pick up certain books and just read them and just feel like, wow, they're just pushing me. They're just pushing me somewhere through, pushing me a little bit into like some new terrain, some new
yeah.
vista of being seen. And yeah, I mean, it's fascinating how these things kind of work, like sort of catalysts or something, maybe, or something like that.
Yeah, he was a real genius, I think, in terms of kind of maybe taking you down a path that seemed to make sense, and then all of a sudden a rug pull, and you're like, "What?" And just okay, I think that was his true gift. Was kind of just sneaking up on you and totally pulling the rug out, and like, oh,
Right, so you think you'd kind of know what's coming next, and then suddenly it's like you're in this room with no floor or something.
yeah, yeah, and then you have to really I think the human mind we're learning is really geared towards predicting the future so that we feel safe and we feel
Mhm.
comfortable. And he would kind of lure you into safety, and then all of a sudden, whoop, and then you have to like reorient everything to this new reality that he just exposed you to. And
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm. Did you ever meet him, or was he a bit before your time? Or
I interacted with him. I never met him in person. As he got older, he had polio or post polio. He had polio as a kid, and then
Mhm.
suffered from post polio, as I understand, kind of on and off throughout his whole life. And as he got
Mhm.
older, he made his money kind of going on lecture circuits for the most part, and eventually he just couldn't travel. So one of his friends, I guess, created this thing called the Maybe Logic Academy. So he taught online classes starting around, I think, around 2003, which is
Mhm.
pretty early on for that kind of thing, kind of pioneering. But so he started
Mhm.
teaching these online classes, and so I started on, I was a part of the Maybe Logic Academy from the very beginning, and I took several classes from him. Um, but I actually, at the time, I think I was too much of a fanboy and not really. I never developed a relationship with him. I was kind of like the super fan that he kept at arm's
Mhm.
length, I think.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I thought, yeah, it is, I don't know, just somewhere so intriguing, because I think, myself growing up, there is this very blinkered sense of being brought up in Britain, uh, from quite a traumatized background and adoption and all of this, there is this kind of, I don't know, very blinkered sense of how life is, how it just, this sense of things just being the way they are, or something like that,
Hmm.
and then for me, because I had so much trauma and so much social dysfunction, it kind of eventually drove me just to do something about it, and I wasn't afraid to take kind of radical action once I kind of saw that it was necessary, you know. But of course, for art, for different people, it's different, and it's just, I don't know, it's just fascinating how, like, I don't know, even at the moment, I'm just looking a little bit at American political scene and all the changes going on and that kind of thing, and just, having had this sense that it's all going to go in one direction or something like that, just from an outsider's perspective, to see, hey, maybe it just goes in a completely different perspective, how difficult it really is to predict the future in some ways. Or, I mean, we don't know and stuff, but I mean, it's just like there is some kind of underlying tricky force that it's very hard to pin down, despite all of our the attempts of our rational mind to do so. You know, that's how I detect it, and I guess someone like Rob Wilson was just a big, he just had a lot of that force inside of him somewhere. That's how, just from my limited knowledge, I would see him. That he had this capacity to just shift and shake things around in the same way that we've seen in the last decade of changes going on in the world, that the playbook, the sense that, okay, you look back at the world and you find certain patterns and you assume that the future is going to play out this way, and it is not playing out this way, or it doesn't seem to be. I find this
Yeah.
stuff interesting.
Yeah. Bob, he really kind of latched on to Timothy Leary's ideas. Leary called it SMILE, SMIILE, and that stood for space migration, intelligence increase, and life extension. And I think Bob really took that message to heart. I don't know that he fully subscribed to this message personally, but I think he really excelled at putting together a message of hope. He really profiled a lot of people like Timothy Leary or Aleister Crowley, but or Buckminster Fuller, and he really focused on the positive side of those people. And I think that space migration, intelligence increase, life extension was a way to think about the future with hope and to kind of
Hmm.
expand possibilities. Like, who really thinks about living off the planet? You have to like, I mean,
Hmm.
maybe it's a little more common today because we have, more of that in our mindset, but the idea that, hey, we're going to evolve past the planet, life extension. Hey, we're going to evolve past death, intelligence increase. Hey, let's get smarter and smarter, and let's take a look at our intelligence. Um,
Hmm.
so those messages to me were him trying to get people to think out of the box and trying to get folks to be hopeful. And he really was a big proponent of the internet, and he felt like the internet would break people out of their conceptual trance.
Hmm.
And maybe kind of along the way, what you're saying is he was promoting that would break us out of our box. We would be exposed to all these different things, and that would break us out of our little mindset. Yet here we are 20 years later, and we're all kind of in these little internet tribes fighting against each other, and it hasn't really panned out like that so far. I don't know if that answers
Yeah,
your
yeah.
question, but that's just kind of where my
Yeah,
mind
no,
went.
no, that's it's interesting to hear you talk, and I mean I was also listening to an esoteric chap. I listen to his podcast sometimes, and he was talking about how Cosmic Trigger, because this is what I remembered it was less like that. It had really just shifted him completely at the time he read it. Was it written in the 80s or something, or I don't know? It was quite early on. Was it something like that?
Yeah, I think mid to late 70s is when that one
Yeah,
came out, I
yeah.
believe. And then that one is a popular one that blows a lot of people's minds, kind of like their
Mhm.
introduction. The Illuminatus is really popular, but it's a big, thick, complicated novel, and
Mhm.
Cosmic Trigger is a lot more accessible and seems to be a catalyst for a great number of people.
Yeah, I have to read it sometime. I've got to get a hold of a copy of that. But this guy was anyway saying, like, it completely inspired him, reading this book.
Yeah,
And then, now still doing his podcast quite a lot older, it's like there has been this kind of slump. Some people call it the Facebook slump or whatever, where it's just all that early potential that was there at that time never really manifested at all. And will it all go in a different direction or whatever? I don't know. I'm kind of interested by the whole thing. I'm interested by the whole thing and the future and stuff
yeah.
like
My, what do I want to say there? We covered Marshall McLuhan on one of our episodes of the podcast, and I interviewed his grandson.
that.
And the thing he recommended to me was a Playboy interview with Marshall McLuhan. And I think I read that thing like 5 times because I would get like 2 pages in and I'd be completely blown away. And I'd have to start over and read. And then by 4 pages, I was completely blown away. But he talked about how certain technologies change consciousness. And so it's starting with the phonetic alphabet, which you might say led to kind of a more linear, like an agrarian, going from hunter gatherer to agrarian, and going from like more of a symbolic language to more of a phonetic language, was the first change in consciousness. And then the printing press really just accelerated that. And that's kind of also when we went into an industrial age. And then
Sorry, what was
McLuhan,
the last bit about about the industrial age? The you said
oh, so
something.
the invention of the printing press,
Right, got you.
you could see is kind of like, in
Yeah.
that, not just the linear type, but also the interchangeable parts of the printing press, kind of as a precursor of the industrial age, where everything's interchangeable and mechanized and just kind of rote and mechanical. And then it blows my mind how some people are just so brilliant. He's as soon as the telegraph came out, he saw that as the digital age basically, and how that was going to create the global village, as he called it. And we are in this transition to the global village he saw, which I think is kind of accelerated by the microchip and the internet and now AI, but that was going to catalyze this transition to the global village. But I guess the main point is he was like, it is going to be a very painful thing. I would love to be around to see it, but I'm kind of glad that I'm not going to have to go through it personally, because he was older, and that it was just going to be, the transition was going to be a mess. And
Hmm.
it feels to me like that we're in the middle of that mess. We haven't got to that utopia that Wilson saw with the internet, but
Hmm.
that as we go through, like, to me, Facebook and social media, particularly Facebook for me, it it brings out the worst in myself, and I think it's like everybody decries the horrors of social media, but I think what it's doing is shining this light on our collective shadow, and
Hmm.
now we're going to have to deal with our collective shadow so that we can evolve to the next level. It's kind of exposing all of our weaknesses so that we can
Hmm.
evolve as a species into whatever the heck it is that McLuhan saw that is coming.
Hmm.
So that's I don't get too upset. I have no love for social media, but I tend to appreciate it in a way that it is kind of accelerating our progress in an ugly and painful way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I certainly consider that I've actually learned quite a lot and still do from interacting on social media, and this thing of like, it just shines a light on certain areas of my psychology that I was not adequately looking at before, on provocative behavior or tendencies to fight with my mind about things or whatever. And I mean, I consider that I've got a lot, got a lot from my social media interactions. And of course, there is the flip side where then I'm spending too long in front of a screen or whatever, and stuff like that. But I mean, I guess thinking about this whole thing with the kind of big space sort of futurism, this idea of going to other planets, colonizing the universe, stuff like that. I think where I've kind of landed more in recent years, but the journey is going to be more internal. It's going to be more
Mm,
internal, and that is like what we haven't really managed to explore as a race, or certainly in the West, as which has been the dominant culture for hundreds of years. I think we haven't really explored inner space very much. There's been this kind of block. I've been reading a bit about Immanuel Kant recently and his concept of time, and how that became
mm,
so, that kind of created this sense of like of what's outside, what's inside, and how it restructured the human personality, and from the 1780s, and then industrialism and stuff. And it's just, I don't know. It's like, I don't know if the short-term destination of humanity is to expand to other planets and things like this. Obviously, if we start blowing up our one, then that's probably quite a good idea. But yeah, like it just seems like this inner journey is, it's never really been looked at very much from the West. Maybe Eastern cultures looked more at it, but the West
mm.
hasn't really started to dig in there yet as a culture, you know. I mean, do you have similar thoughts at all, or did you ever think about this kind of thing, or what's your
Well,
take on it?
what comes up for me, like I said, on social media, is I feel like it brings out the worst in me. I get nasty, I get critical, and and then when I find like I'm always wanting to just snap. I read a post and I want to snap back at them real critically, and what it does is, then I don't want to. I've learned not to do that, and then I pause and I take a look and I'm like, what's going on with me right now?
Yeah, yeah.
Why am I feeling, instead of being, just writing some nasty response and then feeling better about myself for being nasty or whatever, getting it off my chest, I'm like, I turn around like, okay, what's happening for me? Why am I feeling this way? What is it about me that's causing this response? And so there's that kind of internal exploration that I try to do, or um, and well, I'd have to think about that maybe some more. That's a valuable question. even you mentioned the space thing, and you know, I think we'll eventually migrate out into space. Again, I think that whole concept is maybe a way for us to get outside of the box, but it's also, I think we've long felt like we're constrained by the resources of the planet. And if we think beyond that, if we think that there's this infinite space out there with infinite resources, that that can create like, hey, we're not this resource constrained thing. We can, I guess what I'm trying to say is that we can develop this mindset of abundance. Uh,
Hmm.
it's maybe a side note to what you're getting at, but um, yeah, interesting stuff. The other thing that comes up for me is Carl Jung, and he was like, well, this is just my perspective on things from a Western point of view, and the East has its own perspective, and they're actually an older culture, and much they might possibly be much more advanced than us, and we might want to take a look at that. Um, yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, when I was younger or just getting into alternative stuff, there was a lot of talk about the East and Eastern culture, but yeah, I think the fact that, our interactions online can so easy because just like the number of interactions that can happen within a space of time is up so much.
Yeah.
It drove me to understand my behavior more because there's just more of it going on. And then I
Yeah.
have to look, why am I going online now to just get in a fight with someone or whatever, just to find someone to kind of, just to get certain brain chemicals flowing through my system or whatever, just like it is fascinating. It is fascinating. I mean, yeah, I mean, this whole inner space thing. It is really I just still have a sense that there's something much deeper inside our experience of being alive, the world, what the world really is,
Mm.
than really people in the West and largely people in the East are ever really cottoned onto. That somewhere with our this conceptual idea of time, which we're chopping ourselves up into and stuff. We've missed and the development of science, which has created some incredible tech, but has also mentally blocked us from getting
Mm.
internal for many people. I think that there's this kind. I mean, another thing that I certainly learned from time online and debating was like these knee-jerk response skeptics who are just like, well, where's evidence for that, or whatever. So the whole
Right.
theories, which are, there's this tendency to a tyranny of the measurable kind of starts to emerge,
Yes.
and and which is a bit of an emotional term, but I mean, like, we're overlooking so much stuff. It's like just an algorithm chugging along where everything measurable gets boosted and everything not gets pushed down. But at some point, there's like there's a start of a reflection or a shadow emerges from that and starts to push in. I was debating, I don't know much you know about Kant, but his concept of time and critique of pure reason, and how at the same kind of time, the idea of noumenal forces started to emerge. The idea, because he kind of created that concept, got invisible, you've got this unseen world from which it's arising, and
Mm.
all these horrors and terrors started to emerge at the same time as this very rational vision of the world. And so this idea that by just boost everything that's scientific and supposedly measurable and proven, and people in white coats have given a big thumbs up to. At the same time, you're somewhere creating an immense shadow of irrationality, but will at some point start to erupt. And that
Yeah.
you can't just follow one very simple line given by philosophy and think that long term it's going to work. It's like there's a dispensation when it works and then it starts to fall apart. And I guess that's a little bit more where I'm kind of leaning into these days.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's a few things that come up for me there. Certainly, there's this idea that if we can't measure it, it doesn't exist, and it's like, well, our tools for measurement are pretty damn limited. So there's I think, as a Reichian uh, inspired therapist, there's the idea of orgone, but how the hell do we measure that? Well, just because we can't measure it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But again, I think the human mind craves certainty and predictability, and that makes us feel safe. And that whole need is really bastardized science, because science at its core is really about curiosity. It's
Hmm.
about making an observation and then coming up with an idea or a hypothesis and then creating tests to verify that. And then based on the evidence, adjusting your ideas. And so it's this ongoing experiment in curiosity in my mind. But because human beings need certainty, we really just kind of compress it into, oh, this is what we know, so this is what's true, and let's just go with that. And like, no, that's not really science. That's just kind of clinging to what's known. Um, yeah, and yeah, I can ramble
Well,
about all
yeah,
kinds.
yeah. I mean, totally. There is that psychological angle where we want something safe, and then I guess also markets come into it as well, particularly in the West, where you've got basic capitalist system, markets and the capacity to develop things on certain basis, health and safety rules, R&D, and all of this kind of thing, and it also kind of on a market level skews towards extreme safety perhaps, and not
Yeah,
really, yeah, not
yeah,
really
that's
taking risks, not, yeah, the kind of scientific spirit that was there somewhere with Isaac Newton or something or whatever, I mean, as kind of as diminished,
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think the idea of a free market is a complete myth. I mean, that's just nonsense. And so people that criticize free markets are like, well, find me a free market so we can criticize it. But the thing I see with entrepreneurship is that they're coming up against an incumbent technology. I think you can say that big tech, so to speak, is now no longer this entrepreneurial, groundbreaking, blazing a path. They're kind of become crystallized and established, and they use their power to get what's called regulatory capture that helps preserve
hmm
their
hmm
market and their entity,
hmm
and to make it difficult for new innovation. And that's just human nature again. But at the end of the day, I think innovation prevails, despite the obstacles that we put in front of it. That's a whole nother interesting subject. I know your books. I haven't gotten into the second one on the sequel to Lemurian Pushback, but your main character is or one of your main characters is all about the god of capitalism, and I'm fascinated by that, and certainly don't see it as a I don't see it as a god, but I do see it as an evolutionary force. I don't necessarily see it as evil. I don't believe we're necessarily in late stage capitalism so much as we're in late stage American empirism. Um,
hmm
that's a whole, yeah. So I'll
yeah,
pause there.
yeah, strands and threads. I guess something that was very illuminating to me a few months ago was this notion, which I think comes from systems theory or cybernetics, which is like
Mm,
there are only two kinds of feedback loop that exist in the world, and
mm,
that now this may not be entirely correct because I'm not an expert on these things, but the notion really, it was so simple that it hit me very deep inside,
mm,
and affected my thinking a lot and my understanding. And the idea was that you have self-sustaining feedback loops, sometimes called negative
mm.
feedback loops, where the loop simply keeps on going round. It just keeps on going round, and it's a little bit like a thermostat. It's constantly regulating itself to survive longer, and that
Okay.
the natural selection is essentially creates creatures that are driven by these negative feedback loops, not negative in a bad way, but simply self-sustaining. We're a giant kind of multiplicity of thermostats in a sense, or that are
Yeah.
monitoring all sorts of things and bringing themselves back into equilibrium all the time. And but the entire output of natural selection creates just negative feedback loops.
Mm,
And yet at the same time, there's a thing called a positive feedback loop, which is a self-reinforcing feedback loop. So
mm,
that with each loop, instead of sustaining itself and trying to maintain homeostasis, it increases itself. It draws more into itself and tries to increase. And that humans, I mean, this is the theory, that humans are essentially the product of a system which only creates negative feedback loops. And we will just, if we don't have something from outside of us, we will just chug along and we will just, you get married to the girl next door, have kids, they get married to the girl next door, it just sort of chugs along and along. And then this notion that some German philosopher Schopenhauer had. There's an external something is impinging upon this desire to get entangled with positive feedback loops with something which just increases, and that
mm,
capitalism is an example of a positive feedback loop. And that at a certain point around the mid 1700s, some mill owner in Britain, as an example, had sufficiently divested himself from the control of the state and the feudal system such that he could reinvest the money he was making in his mill back into the mill, back into the means of production.
mm,
And at that point, a positive feedback loop was created because he could then produce kind of more stuff from his mill at the set cheaper price or whatever, and start to increase his market share, from the other mill owners. And so I found this really fascinating shit. So it's like, okay, so this is a positive feedback loop that's come into human society at that point,
hmm.
where now capitalism is slowly increasing with each generation or each circuit that it turns. It's pulling more resources in. And at a
Mm.
certain point, if you didn't reinvest the profits of your business back into the means of production or whatever, then you would lose out to other people who did, and they would take your companies over. And this is the kind of I just found this fascinating shit because it was just so simple. I'd heard a lot of these
Yeah.
ideas before, but the idea of this at heart, it was just two feedback loops. Anyway, I'm drifting off a bit, but I mean, I just found that really, really fascinating fucking shit. I mean, like, I just thought, my God, that's like so simple, but it's true. Very, and young men in particular from sort of 15 to 30 go through this phase when they become fascinated with positive feedback loops, not articulating it to themselves like that, but just the idea of doing crazy shit, of something which isn't just about settling down and getting married and getting the right fence or whatever.
Yeah, fascinating. The phrase that comes up for me is like evolve or die. And I have to wrap my head around that one a little bit more to speak to it, but that is interesting. Um,
Well, I just want to throw that in there anyway.
yeah.
Because I mean, it completely, it was like a big aha moment for me. But yeah, society, the world, and I don't know. It just seemed like my opinion about it was super important to me for a long time, and then it's still there like that. But then there's also a sense that I can also go deeper within myself by not just trying to control things, you know,
Hmm.
and by developing my heart more, being able to feel and hear and be in that. It's like it's recently for me that's pulled me more out of that strand of sort of super intellectualism and this idea that I need to be able to try and change the world in some way, which I still have that
Okay.
drive in there, but there's also something else is coming back into me a bit, I think. But do you relate to that at all? Like the this wanting to
There's
see how the world moves with like the inner journey as well in some way?
there's certainly some great deal of appeal for me about just be, well, becoming who I am, like that internal journey you're speaking to, is the more I get into my body, the more I get into the present moment, the more I concentrate on embodied relationship in the moment. Uh, that to me is evolutionary, as opposed to just being some angry anarchist libertarian that's upset with how everything's going. It's like, no, if I evolve my own consciousness, if I improve how I show up in the world, I'm going to feel better. I will bring that inspiration to others by just showing up in a healthy, positive way. Um, that's what comes up for me when you say that. And just, yeah, controlling how I show up, being more of who I am, really discovering and defining who I am, so that I can really sit in that seat of myself, so to speak. Uh, kind of, these are heavy topics, man.
And I think that's really inspiring, man. I mean, that is, I think you're articulating it very well, that instead of proceeding out into a world of social media, angry, this has got to change. How do I get this group of people to change their attitude? What manipulation strategy
Mm,
can I employ? More like I'm slowly learning the same, even at advanced years, No, come more into yourself, be more honest about myself,
mm.
introspect on what my actual feelings are, and allow myself the vulnerability to express that, And I started to do that a little bit in some Twitter threads sometimes, which were a bit kind of spicy ones, and it was bizarre to see people's reactions to, I guess, someone they judged in a certain way as having a certain opinion, then sort of saying, "Hey, maybe you're right," or maybe this aspect of it I hadn't looked at, or whatever. Just really trying to, instead of coming out in this kind of weapon mode with a clear agenda, sustained by all sorts of arguments that I'm right, to actually go in and try and just be honest and see. I mean, in a sense, there's probably a level of manipulation in that you're still trying to create change through honesty and vulnerability, but it's also a more radical and, for me, more of a challenging kind of direction to go in.
Yeah, I used to get all kinds of wrapped up about politics, and like I said, be this kind of angry anarchist libertarian. And I think in order to extract myself from this, I really latched onto this idea that politics is reactionary. It's the last thing to change, and
Mm.
that it's technology and science that creates new technologies, that evolves our consciousness, and on entrepreneurship that feeds science and technology, that leads to real change. And I think I adopted that mindset as a way to calm myself down about politics. But the more I adopted it and kind of forced myself into it, the more I really bought into it. And really, to take it a step further, what I've seen with entrepreneurship is that you have to grow and develop as a human being to become successful. More often than not, I think there's this perception that entrepreneurs are just kind of, I don't know what it is, but it seems like people think that they just kind of stumble onto it. Everybody wants to shit on the billionaires like Musk and Bezos, and it's like, man, those guys. We could say what we want about Musk. There's a lot of things there that we could criticize, but those guys work their asses off to be where they are. And the entrepreneurs I work with, it's they worked their ass off for 5 years to be an overnight success. And people see the overnight success, but what they don't see is the 5, 10, 20 years they put into it, and the things they had to face about themselves,
Mhm.
to learn and grow to become the successful entrepreneur that they are. Um, Again, I guess I get on these tangents and I forget the question, but uh, but But that's what I see, I guess, is that it really is an internal journey, and people see the external results and they think, "Oh, he just got lucky." And like, no, 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 no. He had to face some demons and do some real hard work and perseveres through insurmountable odds and to get where they are. I mean, the people that I work
Hmm.
with sometimes they're an entrepreneur is just usually on the verge of bankruptcy for years, and then all of a sudden it finally comes together, and it takes a certain personality to move through that perseverance, whereas most people would give up, and uh, I really admire that, I guess. Not I
Yeah, for
guess.
sure. For sure, it's like this sense of having actually worked for the money that you've got in your pocket, not but it's like a felt sense rather than a kind of cognitive thing, that
Mm,
like you it's
mm,
like it is deep, I think, and it is intriguing how some of these things proceed as well. I remember I was following because I was kind of in motivation, what you might call motivational psychology for a while with, working, not really coaching, but I learned quite a lot about that scene. And there was one guy, this old Texas oil man, half Mexican, who was just hard as nails. And he would run
mm.
these things in Scotland, and all these young entrepreneurs in their 20s would go there, and he would do the most crazy shit with them, just to fire them up. He would literally get them fighting each other in a boxing ring and stuff like that, and just really, and it was like it was about 5, 10 years ago, and I'm not sure if he's still around. I don't follow that scene anymore, but like, what kind of fascinated me was that it actually worked. Basically, that was the thing. It was like the antithesis of any kind of normal therapeutic approach in many ways. Just get people
Mm.
fighting, being physically aggressive, but in terms of actual follow-up studies and results, it seemed to work pretty well. And it was kind of, I just find that sort of stuff fascinating. That is a tangent anyway. That is a tangent. I mean,
Well, that's, I
yeah,
think that brings people out of their box. I remember an NLP technique, and he was talking about, I think it was students that were working on their PhD thesis, and they were just stuck. They couldn't figure it out. And their assignment was like to go to, say, a McDonald's and order a pizza. And it just something is completely ridiculous, but it just snaps you out of your preconceived notions. And maybe, a boxing match, this is going to fire up your competitiveness and fire up your fight that maybe was latent. And the reason you were struggling is because you were just a little complacent. Again, just breaking people out of their box and getting them to expand their horizons.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that is it. I certainly developed the theory from a bit Reichian stuff and working with clients and my own life. But if you can get someone's energy up, if you can get enough, even if it's only for a short
Mm.
period of time, if you can get their energy up to a new level, they will change. They will change.
Mm.
Often you can introspect till you're blue in the face, and it's not without value. But if someone's energy is up, it will just drive them crazy until they fucking change something, whether it's chasing after a
Mm.
partner or money or whatever it is. If your energy is so high, it won't allow your mind to just keep, negating it, putting things off and whatever. If it's still driving you forwards, in a simplistic example, some young guy who wants to date someone but is just terrified to go up to them. If your energy is so high, but it won't let you, finally you're just driven to confront the situation,
Interesting.
and it's like so that you can sort of, certainly in terms of the psychology of success, simply by, if there's a way of pumping people's energy up at least for a short period, they get so much experience and moving forwards towards goals and no longer bullshitting themselves, that they actually do start to achieve, and I suspect that's
Interesting.
part of why this guy's approach worked with getting people to
Getting
just
their
fight each other
energy.
physically.
That's fast. So I know you're a real body based approach, and that I can see that perspective now really clearly with this example. And my training in Gestalt is about, almost, my mentor just hammered this, like it's about being in relationship. make contact. Contact over time leads to connection. Connection over time leads to relationship. Relationship over time leads to intimacy. And not like sexual intimacy, but just the intimacy
Mhm.
between two human
Mhm.
beings. But the thing about that, it sounds so simple, but to be in contact and connection with somebody quite often to really be in contact and connection, you have to deal with your own shit because
Mhm.
people will trigger you. They will bring up
Mhm.
your shadow, your junk. And so if the primary focus is to be in connection, and if that's like all you do is like I have to be in connection, I have to make contact with people, that forces you to deal with your stuff. And
Mhm.
so as a therapist, I would, you always think there it's called countertransference, right? People get upset
Mhm.
with their clients, or
Mhm.
they have a reaction to their clients,
Mhm.
and so you have to deal with that as the therapist, the countertransference. You have to deal with your
Mhm.
own shit so that you
Mhm.
can be in connection, and that's to me where uh, therapy or coaching or whatever, when it really gets into this relational area, it forces you to evolve. To me,
Mhm.
therapy, let's call it, or coaching or whatever, or just being in a relationship, just me and my wife and being able to meet her, that's a spiritual practice because I have to deal
Mhm.
with my stuff and grow as a human being. Um,
Mhm. Yeah, very much so. Very much so. I think that's just an awesome point, about how society does also push us to live. I've got to
you've got to
I've got to go
run.
in a minute because I've got a client, so I have to bring this. But it's been really fun chatting to you. We can do this again sometime. I think we could see. It's like it's fun and listening to you and what you see and that kind of thing. And like this it's yeah.
Yeah, I
And I
really
think
enjoyed it.
others will enjoy it. Yeah. But I've got to
My,
go because I don't want to be late for my clients. So I've got to.
yeah.
So I wish you all the best, Mike. And I know you're going on a bike journey in France soon. So I hope that goes awesome for you. And I send you lots of love and maybe
Oh,
we'll meet up again in the future. Thank you.
I hope so. Thank you. Let you go, but I really enjoyed it.